With newsworthy cyber attacks and new regulatory changes, it's no wonder consumers are demanding more visibility and control in how and when their data is being used. One thing is clear, the implications around personal data are numerous, and it'll be up to the businesses to provide a new value proposition for their consumers or be left behind. Today I have Mark Casey, Global Sector Leader for Telecoms, Media and Entertainment, and David Cutbill, Risk and Financial Advisory Lead for Telecoms, Media and Entertainment on the pod. Mark, David, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Anish, good morning.
So let's get straight into it, and I think the best thing we can do is let's get a little brief history on data privacy for our listeners. So Mark, I'd love to get that history from you if I could.
I go back to the 80s when I first started in professional services, and I remember the Data Protection Act, 1984 in the UK. This is not a new topic at all. It's been very much a central theme in the IT world, going back 30 odd years. I think what's different now is just the scale of data, the accessibility of data, the richness of data, the extent to which it can be so easily shared at light speed around the world. The impact and power of data is just so different to those first examples of legislation which were enacted.
I think one thing that's different though, Mark, is just that over time the ecosystem here in digital has just kind of built up with a free flow of information, right? It's been the kind of lifeblood of how it's evolved so quickly. So I know we've had a lot of kind of offline privacy notices for years, but it seems now that the regulation is trying to catch up somewhat.
And I think, regulation has, I think, a number of objectives to it. So in some respects, data and its power or value has made it into, we could call it the new oil, the new resource that companies compete for. The resource that's going to make one company better than the other, that's going to keep its customers more engaged and retained and loyal. That, of course, that battleground just sparks more and more interest from governments as to, well, who owns actually this information? Where is it sitting? Who's protecting it?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting evolution, Hanish, of the thought of protecting society, right? The governments have always kind of taken on that role of protecting society, and we can always debate what protecting actually means. But free press then was heavily influenced around our views and opinions, etc. And they've kind of taken on that editorial responsibility in the past. But somehow we seem to be pushing that to the digital platforms, and that's a harsh thing for them to do. I think, Mark, it plays into that whole kind of protecting society, right? The governments in the past have felt that that's their responsibility. And the press has got involved, and we know how politically charged that has become over the last year or so.
One of the things that I'd love to come back on, actually, Mark, where I really like that term where you use data's the new oil, that kind of resources. But I also want to talk about something you mentioned as well, David, around notifications. I'm sure it's not lost on everyone, the amount of notifications we've all got in the recent weeks with the regulation change, what that means. And of course, people are hearing about GDPR. It'd be great to just delve into that as well, just to give everyone a ground around what that is and why they're seeing so many notifications.
GDPR has a lot of components to it. One of the interesting parts of it is this kind of thought around right to be forgotten. And so the sites, if asked by you, have to be able to kind of scrub your data. And I'm sure there are many instances in real life where we'd like to have the right to be forgotten for some of the things we've done in the past. But that and kind of the detailed requirements around it.
One of the things where you mentioned around that right to be forgotten, if I recall correctly, just in the recent Digital Media Trends survey that we published, I believe we said something like 93% of consumers want the ability to request their data back and effectively be forgotten, as you say. I mean, that's overwhelming when we think about those percentages.
People kind of have a view of that they want the data better protected, right? But it'll be interesting with GDPR to see whether people actually use that right. Because we've talked about this, that most sites, you probably want to keep information and history about yourself. It's like going to visit friends and they've forgotten who you are from the last time you walked through the door, right? And the movie, The 50 First Dates, when she has short-term memory loss. I think going online and being forgotten constantly would be painful after a while.
I think that's right, David. I find it fascinating, and I think we are all going through this right now, this steady flow of notifications on your privacy settings with many service providers, quite a few of whom, I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'd actually forgotten that I'd even subscribed to them.
Right.
So we're all in this world of, I didn't realize just how far and wide I had shared my personal data. Now, I mean, look, I think human beings, they look at these things and they do get alarmed, but equally they forget that it is the customization of the internet and the digital platforms that makes our digital lives so much more rewarding and convenient and efficient. You know, we often say these days how when you're using your phones, and they have now become the dominant digital device in our lives, it just seems to know me. It just seems to second guess when I'm trying to, call up transport services. It just seems to know where I'm going. It's linked in with my calendar. Everything is just flowing nicely. I like that, and I think most people do. Once you start disconnecting all of those data points, and once that history starts to get removed, the clunkiness and the immaturity of the digital experience, which we remember from 5, 6, 7 years ago, have now just returned again. So I think there's a lot of unintended consequences here. People want protection over their data. They've said so. People are up in arms about where is my information, and they haven't thought that the world we were in and the way information was shared was also done with an intention of making the digital experience as frictionless and as convenient as possible.
We talked about a little bit earlier around the desire to delete all of that data. But somewhere in there, is there a question of, do consumers really trust the brands, the companies, to protect their data? One thing's being able to request it back. The other thing, the benefit of seeing that personal data. But do you and I as consumers, do we really trust the companies to protect our data?
I think there's probably two elements to that. One is just the basic data breach, right? And we've seen it with a lot of online companies, a lot of consumer retail companies where the data has been breached and they've lost our data. And so there's an element of kind of trust around just security, cybersecurity. We actually hold my data from threats from the outside. But I think in even those situations, I mean, you're still shopping probably at those retailers that have had a major data breach 6 months ago, right? So it doesn't really change our behavior. And then back to Mark's earlier point, I think there's the use of data. So I've given you a whole wealth of information about myself and how well we use that data. I think we've talked about the genie is out of the bottle, right? So we're not going to be able to stuff it back in, but you have to show me that you can use that data in the way that is beneficial to me.
And I think also people tend to move on, and we've seen this in the world. Shocking events, revelations, they hit the media, trending number one, we're all talking about it, and then a week later we're on to something else, because that's just the way of the world.
They have a short half-life, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nanoseconds.
And even, at a personal level, the intelligent advertising, and it's getting better and better all the time, that I receive, I quite enjoy. For the cyclists out there, you don't be sitting on your laptop or your phone getting peppered with ads for knitting needles or something like that. And that's the world we're going to be in if you disconnect all these data points. And remember, if you're not paying a subscription for a digital platform service, then you can't get the benefits for nothing. What is it about this world? You get nothing for nothing these days. So if you're not going to pay a subscription, then expect your information to be used in a way to achieve targeted advertising. So there is going to be a commercial value proposition here for the use of what are some stunning global platforms these days.
And that's always been the value exchange. That was a value exchange on television, right? Which is target programming in exchange for advertising. And I think the internet has been built off that. It's a free internet, basically.
I get the point that if I'm not paying for a particular service or an experience online, I can still potentially get maybe just as good an experience from a free perspective, as long as I'm willing to share that data. And in some way, I'm making that conscious decision to share certain data about myself. I want to move to a bit more of an unconscious sharing. And by that, what I mean is it's, in the last year or so, personal digital assistants, they're everywhere. They're starting to make their way into the home. And the reason I describe it as an unconscious, we're effectively sharing all the time. It's always listening. So where does that stand when it comes to data privacy in a different way from me signing up to a site and effectively clicking, yes, I agree, for my data to be shared?
And I think expect with the rollout of 5G and a much greater, I don't think people even understand what the IoT world means for the future, but compared to what we see now, it's chalk and cheese. And the amount of information recording mechanisms in our homes, in our cars, at our work is just going to multiply dramatically. So we will be always on. And whether it's visual or audio, doesn't matter. So to me, there's an adjustment phase humankind is just going to have to go through as it accepts that this is just the price we pay for living in a digital world. Perhaps people's understanding of it and the scale of it has not been there. Hence why there's, I think, a degree of fear about what's going on and who can see what I'm doing, what I'm saying, and so on. And I think people will naturally get more accustomed to look at the demographics in our society. Younger people don't seem to mind as much as older people. Maybe they'll change as they grow up. Maybe they won't. Maybe that's just the new order. The millennials are showing us the way.
I do wonder at some point whether there will be certain regulation as to what can be shared or certain checks or safety nets before information is shared across. And I don't know whether that will be the tech companies themselves that have got to push that forward, or whether it'll be something coming up from a regulation, a digital bill of rights, if you want, that actually comes forward.
Do you think the regulation's the right way to go? Because we tend to regulate backwards, right? And it's very easy to regulate backwards, but this ecosystem changes every year, every 10 minutes, it seems. And so it seems a better solution if you have the companies design the products in the way that the consumers like it. So coming back to your earlier point, Hanish, it seems like the voice interchange is the new way, right? You're not necessarily going to type, you're not necessarily going to go online, you're going to talk. And so the new products out there maybe will have a little of that built in. Mm-hmm. They'll have a certain amount of recording, they'll stop recording, they'll only come on when you want them to, etc. So the product, I think, will self-regulate.
Sounds like in some way maybe that's their big differentiator then, right? In terms of you've got these assistants, they're always on, and maybe using that parallel of where you went, Mark, with our smartphones. In some way they know everything about us and it's our hub. Maybe these assistants will soon become our new hub, where they're the ones that are connecting, and as you said, 5G, IoT, bringing it all together. That maybe the differentiation is how it's going to use our data, how it's going to protect our data, still give us that experience, still give us that frictionless experience as a whole, but it's still keeping things very secure, and that may be the differentiator then.
Yeah, we might enter this world of kind of a personal butler. Who doesn't want a butler, right?
Correct.
And where you kind of suck all the information back from all these disparate sites that have been holding it, and now you hold it yourself, or your personal butler holds it and makes those decisions for you. So the hard, easy decisions that you make every day, it will actually seamlessly do based on the data and what you've done before. And so that may be our way of kind of living of the future, having kind of personal butler sitting right in front of us.
And of course, we mustn't forget too that the digital world has spawned the creation of lots of new and significantly large employers of talent, and creating new jobs and new careers and new futures for people. So as much as these companies have done, very well from a stock market standpoint, their fundamentals are really key for the future. So we need to be helping and support their progress and their success for the careers in the future of our children and many of the millennials today.
Just going on to that point of where it sees going in the future with data and new jobs, etc. One of the things I want to touch upon is that if you roll back just even a few years ago, and it's just as important now, of course, is everyone's talking data. Have we got to a point where how valuable that data is is kind of diminishing for certain areas? Is it starting to use the analogy of data as the new oil? Is it in some way becoming a little bit toxic and a little bit waste in terms of just the amount of data that's out there?
Well, you know, it's been said we live in a world with oceans of data, but only puddles of insights. And that's why the emergence of, artificial intelligence engines and the focus, there's a huge amount of time and money been invested in AI for that reason, because we actually haven't a hope of being able to use this data properly these days. And I think in some years to come, we will laugh at at what we call insights that we've generated today, that it would look very puny and very amateur compared to the super intelligent AI platforms of the future.
Yeah, I don't think the value of data is diminishing. I think it's increasing, right? But there is this temptation, and we talked about this earlier, with kind of regulating or governments of the big data companies becoming tainted, like the big oil companies did in the past, right? And they're so powerful and so big that governments are afraid of them and they're now starting to regulate them, especially from different countries or different territories. So I think big data is still valuable. There's just a kind of hygiene element around it right now.
Just going exactly where you've gone, that maybe there's a fear or they're somewhat tainted in terms of the big data players. But this ecosystem has many contributors along it, and some of those are just third parties. Where does the view sit with those who may not directly related to either holding your data, consuming your data, but certainly living off the ecosystem of data? What does that mean for third parties and their role when it comes to data protection?
One of, I think, the difficult things we've moved into is this kind of highly interconnected ecosystem world, right? Whereas companies are not kind of vertically integrated generally, but they work with so many different partners within an ecosystem. I'm not sure how you enforce the kind of ecosystem rules and guides and ways of behaving and protection across that, except through the companies themselves, kind of self-regulating across the different ecosystems and the companies they play with.
Look, sharing data with third parties has been with us for decades. This is not new. The circumstances behind this revelation recently has perhaps just brought it more to the fore in the public's mind, and it sells copy, the news about, who has had what data and how did it influence political elections and so on. But this is not new at all. It's why, as David said, it's why the ecosystem works, because the ecosystem by their nature are a whole cohort of companies working together towards some common set of goals. That's why ecosystems work. So sharing information with third parties is not a threat or it's not a danger. It's just the way of doing digital business.
And there's always going to be bad actors, right? In any ecosystem, any world, offline, online, etc. And you can't legislate against the few bad actors that sit out there.
Correct. Otherwise, we'll all stop doing mobile payments and we'll all get back to cash and queues on a Friday afternoon at the bank as we make our lodgements. I mean, if that's the way you want to do it, that's fine. You certainly won't be hacked. But your Friday afternoon isn't going to be as enjoyable as it is now.
And the burglar may still steal the cash from under your bed. So.
Correct. Yeah.
So a little bit of summing up of what I've heard in terms of, yes, of course, data is important. We're seeing that it's playing out at a potentially a political level. Companies, third parties, ecosystem, consumers are definitely well aware of it, what's happening in the media space. We've got some differences in terms of generations and how they're viewing it. You could argue there's an element of two sides of the coin, whichever way you're looking at it. So do consumers really care about data privacy? And I want to flip to you first, Mark. What's your position on that?
I think humankind, just generally speaking, it's not just about data, is fickle and forgetful and moves on and gets excited by something new and then it moves on to something else new because that's the way they get excited.
Yeah, I think there's a certain level of concern that will always be there, right, around the hygiene as we talked about earlier. But if you look at it, it's difficult to tell whether it's just a certain level of intensity right now because of the political, highly charged nature of the sharing information and the impact that it had. And whether we're actually just feeling the press and the government manufacturing outrage on behalf of the consumers. And so I think that's why GDPR is kind of interesting, not just because of the sheer breadth of the legislation, but it's a chance for consumers to act. And will they really act? Or will they be quite happy with the way things are working now?
And you know what? It's. I mean, this has been proven so many times before. Humankind has a cognitive bias on most things, if maybe all things. Examples perhaps in the media world would be around, views of people on how much linear TV they're watching versus over-the-top streaming. And they will over-index on the streaming and under-index on the linear TV because in some respects that's the message they'd like to put out to people. That's right. I'm moving on. I've evolved. I don't sit in front of a TV set and watch, linear broadcasts and ads. I'm more sophisticated. And guess what? They're still actually watching a whole lot of linear TV. And you know what? They're not streaming as much as they used to. So people have a bias in their minds. That's just what humankind is all about. So that's why I think this sense of concern and anxiety and data, it will come and go just like a cold.
Well, one of the areas that has changed, though, is around kind of the ad blocking software. I think we've seen in the last year that has been enacted by a lot of people, even the younger generations who said that they were happy to get advertising in exchange for content, have employed ad blocking software. A lot of the time, I think that's just because it increases performance and it's easy to do, and they're not necessarily kind of trying to block the ads. But if technology makes it easy for them with no downside to enact those kind of things, then they'll probably do it, right? But if there's a downside to the quality of the experience they get on the other end, if you stop giving them free content because now they've employed ad blocking software, then either they're going to have to subscribe or they're going to give up on the free content.
And the content creators and distributors, they're also, they're not stupid. They're going to get ahead of that game as well, And then let's not forget, of course, that 1 in 5 people like ads. I like ads. I like watching ads on TV, and I'm not afraid to say so.
You're a marketer's dream, Mark. Let's go from there for a second. We're a fickle bunch. We're hot on data protection right now, and maybe, as you're saying, Mark, we won't care about it. We'll care about something new. So if that's the case, how do companies as a whole, how do they form their strategy around data protection? What do companies do to form their strategy?
I think you're hoping, right, that the regulators are not the ones that drive the future business models. Clearly, it's easier for them to regulate in hindsight and much more difficult with foresight. And we really don't want the future business models dictated by government. So hopefully the marketplace will allow and drive that kind of innovation.
The battlegrounds are, well known. The nature of the battles will just continually change, so privacy and sovereignty issues or looking after national interests, generally speaking, is one. And now the battleground is seeing the battle for supremacy around AI and machine learning, neural networks, and eventually there'll be battlegrounds on other topics, and you could see in the world of cloud, companies are right around the world already. It's all about scale, land grab, dominance. And, those battle lines will be drawn. There always are when there's the last 2 or 3 big players, who's going to make the step change through something dramatic in M&A or try and, break through some of those political borders that have stopped them growing that final, great leap. So we will just see this thing time and time again as we eat the popcorn, drink the Coke, and watch the movie play out.
It's a little more subtle, I think, with technology and data, right? People don't see it as much. We're hearing a lot, especially kind of in the US and the US-China and others, around this kind of protectionism. But people tend to focus on the hard goods and the tariffs and everything else. But this kind of domination and interplay around technology and data and use of regulations and other things, I think it's just a little bit more subtle, but it's there. And a lot of people are talking about it. It just doesn't make the mainstream press.
This is fascinating when I think about what you guys have highlighted going forward in terms of just where it is at a personal level, what we individually maybe care about, or to the point earlier, may not care about going forward in terms of our own data, how the companies are going to need to be forming their strategy and what there is around regulation that's going to in some way guide how they think about their strategies and their platforms and capturing of our data. And then at an even bigger level, just some of those geopolitical aspects and the use of AI to really win the battle over data and frankly our personal data. It certainly feels that it's a huge topic just beyond what we all care about in the immediacy of things that we're seeing in the press. Fantastic topic, I think, and it's certainly given everyone plenty to think about when it comes to their personal data. So with that, Mark, David, I really want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Hanish.
Thanks, Hanish.